Well, Professor Dirk Kotze is a professor of political sciences at the University of South Africa. Professor Kotze, good afternoon to you. I think so many people, so many of us, don't really know how this is going to play out. Do you think the leaders of the parties themselves really have a clear strategy at the moment, or they're just making it up as they go along?
Well, I think, strictly speaking, it's still very early in terms of the negotiations. I think what we've seen now is the first option that the ANC is focused on, and that is, as you indicated, the Government of National Unity. But it's clear that they are still relatively early in this stage. They are consulting with different political parties, try to find out where they stand. They have reached some clarity already about the MK party. But for example, in the case of the EFF and the Patriotic Alliance, those parties approached the ANC. It's not the ANC that approached them. So I think we can see, therefore, very different dynamics with respect to that. The ANC themselves identified three options, of which the Government of National Unity is one, but there's also the option of the ANC together with the DA and the IFP, and then what they call the confidence and supply agreement, also with, well, it can be a different combination of political parties. So I think they first try to see how far this national government, Government of National Unity can go. And whether it is not overloaded, because one of the key issues will be is who's in and who's out. Remember, there's 18 parties that receive seats in Parliament. Of them, I would say 8 have a relatively substantial number of seats. The other 10 have only 1 or 2 seats or 3 seats, and that will be possibly too few or too small in order to be a part of such a formation of a Government of National Unity. But these are becoming then the more difficult choices or decisions, or who's going to be part of it and who not. And that it does not create the impression that it is sort of leaning towards the DA, because that's what the ANC is very sensitive about at the moment.
So on that point, I mean, it seems to me that there might well be a real debate in the ANC about what to do. And that maybe older people in the ANC, maybe people on the National Executive Committee, would be okay with working with the DA. And younger people, maybe people in the provincial leaderships of the ANC, would rather work with the EFF. Could this be one of those moments where you really get to see the fault lines in the ANC, which there may be an age divide here over this question?
Yes, I think that is indeed so. And that is why I'm a bit cautious to after today, which is only reflecting on the discussion in the National Working Committee, that we already start to develop some conclusions. The National Executive Committee is more as a broader formation. I think it's a bit of an unruly body sometimes. And I'm not sure that they will have the same outcome as today's one. If it goes to the provinces, which is then the step thereafter, it might become even more complicated. And I think that is why I'm still relatively reserved about saying this is already going in a very specific direction of a particular model of coalition governments that will be used. Because for that reason that you are saying, and that is that there's so many fault lines also within the DA. It's not only within the ANC. Many of the DA persons will also say we are going to be co-opted by the ANC. We are going to be contaminated by working together with the ANC. So the same process will also happen on the DA side.
One of the risks with a grand national sort of government, a grand national coalition, if you like, is who gets left out. So, yes, maybe, you know, MK gets left out. If they don't accept the result of the elections and don't take their seats in Parliament, well, you know, they can't really be part of it. But then you have one sort of quite big party left out. And don't you need to be quite careful about leaving out significant players? But if you're going to have a government of national unity, you actually need to have everybody. And isn't that quite difficult?
Yes, that is so. And that is why if we think back quickly, for example, to 1994, there was a threshold of 10%. And that is why only the ANC, the New National Party, and the IFP were included in that. And I think something similar they have to develop for this. The minute small parties simply cannot be part of such an arrangement. It is only those parties with relatively substantial support or support that they've demonstrated over time also. So it is not a party of everyone. It is a party of the most significant government of the most significant political parties. It's only in countries where they have a two-party system, like, for example, in the UK during the two world wars, where they had governments of national unity between the two main parties. But we are not in that situation. We have a multi-party system, and therefore the decision will have to be who are the core elements that will have to be in such an arrangement.
So, I mean, there's a lot that's going to happen here. Do you think a deal with MK is just off the table? I mean, yes, MK is not, it seems, responding to the ANC. Former President Zuma, I mean, we spoke to Omri Makwale a few moments ago. He made the point that it would basically be the same fights we used to see in the ANC between the RET faction and everybody else, and that there'll be no point in working with MK. I mean, do you go along with that?
I tend to agree with that. I think, over and above the arguments about compatibility or whether they will be able to work together, the point is that the MK is the very reason why the ANC is where it is today. Most of the votes that the ANC lost went to MK. So therefore, to include in a government where you have to develop trust amongst each other, you have the party that actually caused your demise. It's going to be very difficult to do that. So I don't think that is therefore a solid basis. Over and above the fact that there's still the disciplinary hearing outstanding against President Zuma, and other very important factors where they simply won't be able to come together. So I don't think that there is room at this stage for cooperation between them. There's an interesting document, and I'm not sure whether the ANC refers to that as also one of the documents that's not genuine. Which is a draft discussion document in which they are very explicit about MK, as well as the EFF actually, and why they can't work with them in such a coalition formation. But we will have to see if that is really an authentic ANC document. But therein it's very clear that there's actually no chance of working with them.
I mean, objectively, if you look at the position that the ANC is in now, just over 40% of the vote, the second biggest political party, which would, in most sort of political circumstances, would be your main rival, certainly your strongest rival, and for the moment, I suppose the DA kind of. And they come to you and they say, we'll keep you in power, and we want almost no power for yourselves. We just want the position of Speaker and a few other positions in Parliament. We don't want positions in Cabinet at all. I mean, that's a really good deal, isn't it? But isn't it a really good deal with a little bit of something in it? The DA's up to something here, and that's going to be difficult for the ANC. And if you reintroduce our history and reintroduce how important race is in this conversation, that's what makes it hard. But it seems to me that objectively, the DA's made this offer, I think it is sort of made this offer, deliberately to put the ANC in a position where it almost has to accept it. It won't get a better deal than this, objectively, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Yes, that is so. And it's actually, for me, I was absolutely surprised that they made that or put that on the table, because it is not actually a power sharing deal. It is something in which there's an allocation of different parts of the state that they can then deal with. So in effect is that they say the ANC can continue with being in charge of the executive of government, and they will concentrate on Parliament. But I think in reality, it's not a very effective way of developing that type of cooperation, because it's even a more unequal relationship than what will be within a government of national unity. So I think that proposal most possibly the DA have moved away from, and is starting to think about, what is really the arrangements that must be included in a power sharing agreement, because that in essence is what a coalition government is about. If it's not about power sharing, it's not really a coalition government.
I'm asking everyone this question. I don't know. I'm not convinced that we'll actually have an agreement in the 14-day time period, 11 days from now. I mean, the ANC could find that actually the provinces want to go one way. We expect the South African Communist Party to speak later this afternoon. They might want to go in one way. Cosatu's already said it doesn't want to go with the DA. There'll be other leaders. President Cyril Ramaphosa may not want to go with the EFF. That actually we might get to the point where Parliament has to meet And it's actually very difficult to know what happens if there's no agreement.
Well, I think the first cut-off point of 14 days after the election results were announced is for the election of the president. So it means that they must have a majority of 50% plus one in order to elect the president. It means that it doesn't mean that the final arrangements for a government of national or any coalition government has been agreed upon already. So it's actually the first step of a coalition. The second step will then be, and they have another 5 or even more days for that, until the 5 days is for the inauguration of the president, because only then the current cabinet will be dissolved. So there won't be a vacuum in terms of the executive. But once the president has been inaugurated, there won't be a cabinet anymore. And that's the time when there must then be the nuts and bolts of a coalition government must just then become in operation. So then we must have an agreement about how the cabinet will be composed, who will be involved in the other positions. Also, and the same applies to the provinces. Or the same time period also applies to them, 14 days and 5 days for the inauguration of the premiers. So they have a little bit of extra time, but at all not much. And I think what it does say to us is that the focus ultimately will go much more towards the composition of the executive. Therefore, who's going to be whom in terms of ministerial positions. And that the issues about policy and compatibility in terms of how ideologies come together, that I think will take much more time beyond this period, and not that it will be concluded by the time there's an agreement.
And then former President Jacob Zuma, Mkhonto weSizwe, still disputing the results of the election. Do you think he might refuse to take his seats? MK might not take their seats in Parliament? Could that happen?
Very much so, but it won't have any impact on the process. The Parliament must just have a quorum of a third of its members. It's around about 134. And then for the president to be elected, it must be by an ordinary majority. And that means around about 67. So it is their absence won't make any impact on these processes.
Professor Dirk Kotze, thank you very much indeed. Professor of Political Sciences at the University of South Africa. Really do appreciate the time.